This is Minnesota Liberty, brought to you by the Libertarian Party of Minnesota, bringing you peace, prosperity, and freedom from the land of 10,000 lakes.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Minnesota Liberty Podcast, sponsored by the Libertarian Party of Minnesota. And I don't normally do this. This is usually James' job to come in and do the introduction. So I'm just going to go right into our guests. Last week we started with this, and then the next couple of weeks that we are talking to veterans leading up to Memorial Day. And so we have a special guest today who I'm kind of excited to talk to because of who he is and what he did. And Bob Seifert from Minnesota. And so, hi, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good.
So, and then I have Troy Felton with us this afternoon also to be the co-host while James is on vacation. So it's he's having fun, and here we are still in Minnesota.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, we're talking to veterans, and last week we started with myself. That was a complete accident. I had screwed up the schedule. I had actually intended on not being in it at all, and talking to other people. But then but Bob, were in the Army.
I was.
And so I guess I'm just going to let you explain kind of, what the decisions or the reasons were that you joined, what you did, how long you were in. Just tell a little bit about your history.
Okay. Yeah. So I grew up on a farm here in Otter Tail County. All the while when I was a kid, that's all I thought about was joining the military. As I got older, probably, into my early teens, I got interested in other things, cars and, mechanical stuff. So I started tinkering around with a lot of that stuff. So I was looking at going to school for mechanical engineering or something. And it was probably my end of my junior year, I started getting just really fed up with school. And so I kind of started shopping around with recruiters and everything. And then, so beginning of my senior year, in October, so that would be October of '83, was when the invasion of Grenada happened. And I woke up one morning and heard that on the radio, and I thought, oh, that's it. That's what I'm going to go do. So, started hitting up recruiters again. My recruiter thought I was nuts because I wanted to jump out of airplanes and be a ranger and do all that stuff that we've just heard about in the news. And he was a medic, and so he tried talking me out of it, tried talking me into being a medic. And all I wanted to be was an infantryman, because if you're going to be in the Army, you might as well do the Army stuff, right? Yeah. So I ended up, he finally sent me to MEPS, and I enlisted. Didn't go to a Ranger battalion like I wanted to because I had taken a bonus. So with the bonus, they sent me to the 82nd, which wasn't bad either. So I spent 4 years in the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, which turned out to be a good place to be anyway, because Special Forces, at that time, 7th Group and the 5th Group were on post. And so I got to know a lot of SF guys too. And then a lot of the guys that were in my unit ended up going SF and everything. Well, because I had gone... towards the end of my 4 years there, about 3 years in, I went to Ranger School. And then, so the 82nd kind of claimed dibs on me for 2 more years. So I wanted to re-enlist. There was a program back then that would put you into Special Forces. You could go try out for it. But I wasn't allowed to do that. I was going to have to stay in the 82nd. And I had already done everything there that I could do. So I ETS'd and thought, okay, maybe the mechanical engineering thing. Started school right away. Got bored with it almost immediately. And then Desert Storm came along. All this while I was in the Minnesota Guard. So I volunteered for that. Liked it. At the same time, I had taken a lot of biology classes and things like that in college, and had become an EMT. So started looking into that and talked to the Air Force about being a PJ, and the recruiter was lying. I didn't tell him I had I was a veteran that I had already been in. And so he was lying to me. I knew he was lying to me. So, okay, enough of the Air Force. So I ended up, got mobilized for Desert Storm. When I came back from that, I did some stuff still in Minnesota in the Guard full time. I was a sniper instructor while we still had a sniper school here. And then when that shut down, I finally went out to Colorado, and there's a National Guard Special Forces unit there. So I figured go through the Q course in the National Guard unit. If you don't make it, there's no real obligation. You're not getting shipped off worldwide assignment. So went and did that. Started that in 93, finished it at the end of 94. So it was about a year and a half going through the medic course. So I was a Special Forces medic. Did 6 months of language school after that. Almost as soon as I finished that up, they asked me if I wanted to go to the communications course. So later, about 4 months later, I left, went and learned Morse code for 10 weeks, which was pure torture. And then went through all I had to do was the phase 2 of that. So I went through, became a communications sergeant on top of it. And then not long after that, they asked me if I wanted to go to the operations and intelligence course. So I went through that and got another MOS. So within a few years, I had become an 18 Delta, an 18 Echo, and an 18 Fox. And then did some other schools in there too. Looked into going back into the regular Army, talked to the the U.S. Army Special Forces Command Sergeant Major, and he told me that at the time 10th Group had moved out to Colorado, and so there was guys that had just PCS'd, and then now they were taking some of those same guys that had just PCS'd from Fort Devens in Massachusetts, and they were going to PCS them to Germany, and they didn't want to go. So I volunteered to go in place of one of them. Yusufic Sergeant Major told me that I should just consider myself lucky if they let me back on active duty. So I kind of got a case of the ass over that and started looking into going to another unit at Fort Bragg. But in the meantime, there was an AGR job opened up. Colorado has a Special Forces battalion, or at the time had 2 of the companies were still there, plus the headquarters and the support company. So in between, I went and I figured, well, I'll do a couple years here or until I get sick of it, and then I'll go out to Bragg, and did it for 2 years, or ended up doing 4 years there, and then that was right up until 9/11. So 9/11 happened. I was still out there. Had already made up my mind I was quitting before that even happened. I was going to go out to Bragg, and our unit got picked to go with, so my company, I was the operations sergeant of it at the time, got picked to go with 5th Group. So they mobilized the unit. We went out to Fort Campbell, and then so I had become a team sergeant in November. They took my team in December because I was the lowest ranking team sergeant in the company. So they broke up my team. All I had left was a captain. So the captain and I went to Saudi Arabia and did fire support for 5th Group while they did the whole, the invasion was still going on. I missed the beginning of it, but got in on, while everything was still happening, pretty much with hunting for bin Laden and all the stuff they were doing up in Tora Bora, and made it in for all that. So, and then I came back from that. I quit AGR. I recruited actually here in Minnesota for about a year and quit that because, again, there are some good recruiters and then there are some that are not. And being around the ones that weren't, decided it was better. I went back out to Colorado. They gave me another AGR job, even though I'd quit the one I'd been in. So I did that for a while again. Did deployments, a lot of back then, like even before 9/11, we did JSETs. So they were, it's a combined, you're working actually with a host nation. So places I went were like Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, places like that, just out in the middle of nowhere, along with some bigger ones. But we went to Thailand at least once a year. We went to Korea at least once a year. But you'd go in and train up either their police forces or their military forces. So after I went back out there, did some more of those, and then we went to Iraq. At that point, I had over 18 years, or I went over 18, I think, in Iraq maybe or something. So I was either going to go back to 10th Group and stay there and finish out my time, or Special Operations Command Africa was being stood up. So went over there for about a year, helped stand up that command, and then came back and was back at Fort Carson and retired out of Fort Carson in 2010.
Okay.
So that's the long story of what I did in my career.
Yeah. Well, like when you're in the Army, there's always, things change and sometimes change very quickly.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I had my total time in was 26 years. In that, I did, it was a little over 22 years of active duty in 26. So most of the time that I was not on active duty was while I was in college before I got moved for Desert Storm.
So you went to Iraq. Did you also go to Afghanistan?
Yep. So I did the fire support stuff for 5th Group. And then after that went into Afghanistan, but then from Afghanistan up into K2, Karshi-Khanabad, up in Uzbekistan. So it was up there, linked up with my old team. And then we went into Afghanistan.
Okay. Did you guys ever go into Syria?
Accidentally, yeah.
Okay.
So when I was in Iraq, my team we were right on the border with Syria. Mm. So this was before Syria was a thing. We were not allowed to go over there. We had guys that we were watching, monitoring. They were over in Syria, and then they would come through our port of entry. So I was right on the border. That was one of the things we ran. Was my ODA didn't run that, but on that combat outpost, we ran the POA also, or POE. Sorry.
What years was that happening?
So that was 2007, 2008 was Iraq.
Okay.
So I was there for the surge.
Yeah. Yeah, so was I, actually.
Yeah. The surge was kind of a joke.
Yeah. But the surge by keeping people who were already deployed to Baghdad in Baghdad. That's how it happened for us.
Yeah, that's what they did with us too. They took over. I mean, we did whatever we needed to do, and I had a very for that team, it was very intel intensive, and then so we would find our own targets, and then we would execute on those targets. While they really were pushing the surge part of it, the battalions all the way. I mean, the JSOTF is running, telling us how many people we have to put on a truck, how many, where we have to go, what we have, how long we have to stay out, because all they were looking for at that point was numbers.
Yeah.
It was just trying to make good numbers up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a joke. And if you don't let anybody out, we kept going out, but the guys that we were on the COP with was a CAV unit, and they weren't allowed to go out. So they stayed there, and yes, of course, casualties are going to go down when you're not letting anybody off the FOBs or the cops.
Yeah. Do you remember what CAV unit that was there with you?
I don't remember anymore which one it was. We took over from one, and then another one replaced them while we were there. And I do not remember who they were.
Yeah.
Anymore.
There's a lot of, the units, they can turn over very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So Troy, you had something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's a very, very extensive resume that you have there for the 18 or was it 26 years that you were
26
in.
Yep.
And yeah.
Oh.
And hearing you talk back through your experience in there, Bob, me not having been in the military, first I want to thank you and Rebecca both for your service. I heard a lot of terms that you guys might have been a little bit more familiar with that I wasn't, but I think I caught the gist of it. The one that stuck out to me was the 18 Delta, 18 Fox, and I think 18 Echo. What
so
is
those
that?
are the MOSs. So the Army uses MOSs. So for your job, it's called military occupational specialty. So when I was an infantryman, I was an 11 Hotel and an 11 Bravo. So direct fire, basically a rifleman, and then a heavy anti-armor weapons crew member. And then the 18 Delta is the Special Forces medic. 18 Echo is the Special Forces communication sergeant, and the 18 Fox is the Special Forces intelligence sergeant. And then when I made E8, I was an 18 Zulu, because that's all of these career fields have basically, when you hit some point in there, then you become the big guy, that it's just one MOS. So everybody becomes a Zulu at that level.
Okay.
So if you're an infantryman at an E8, you're an 11 Zulu. If you're a special forces guy at an E8, you're an 18 Zulu.
Okay. So you got out as an E8, as a master sergeant?
Yep.
Yeah, that's I was kind of, after a master sergeant, master sergeant, first sergeant for people. Anyways, those are the same rank, but they're, kind of have a different job. Saying that for everybody else's benefit that may not understand. But anyways, after that, there really is only a sergeant major as an enlisted. Right. That's the only other rank that's higher.
Right. And I was going to be given a position. I would have been in an E9 position. I would have gone to the academy. Well, they wanted me to re-enlist and stay in when I got back from Germany. And at that point, I was just so fed up with all of the things I had seen, especially in the war on terror, just the contradictions. We went into Iraq. It was supposed to be their thing was by, with, and through. So you're supposed to be doing everything through with your Iraqi partner forces. So we had a infantry battalion that we worked with. And so when we went in there, we were doing that. And by the end, they completely went backwards on that. They were sending out ODAs by themselves a lot just to get the numbers up, again, because of the surge and everything else that was going on. So just trying to make somebody's career at the end, because instead of doing the right thing, they wanted to do what was going to get them. So battalion commander now is going to get a group command because of how many missions people went on. They actually measured everything. I mean, how many people had been killed, how many supposed bad guys had been killed. I mean, that went up on their score sheet also. So there's an incentive to go out, and even though that person, a lot of the people we had in our area we screwed that country up.
Yeah.
Completely. And so you got a lot of people that are now out of work, or, we've completely broken their economy, everything else. So you've got guys that are taking money to attack you when they don't really want to attack you. Their heart isn't in it, thankfully, because they didn't do it well. So, we had IEDs that just fizzled, they just, the whole, I was very disillusioned, I guess I'll just put it that way, at the end of all of this, that they had completely flip-flopped. And, if you'd gone out and killed these guys that are just trying to get some money for their family because they're literally starving, because we've completely screwed their country up and screwed up their whole economy. They don't have money to, the dirt, you've seen the dirt there, Rebecca. It's just crap. You can't grow anything in it. They've destroyed it. So it only grows with a lot of fertilizer. Well, if they can't buy the fertilizer, then they can't grow the crops. We totally.
Yeah, we called it moon dust.
Yeah.
This was just moon dust. That's what it was.
Yep. Yeah, it's like talcum powder. Some of
it
is. It's so fine ground up, and nothing grows in it unless they just load it up with fertilizer. Well, if the guy can't front the money for the fertilizer, he can't there's no point in him planting anything. So, farms are just laying there with nothing in them. We were up in an agricultural area, and most of the people couldn't farm. We screwed up the irrigation ditches. I mean, we had, there's irrigation ditches running through that whole everywhere there. They couldn't get water out of them because of, things were all broken. Nothing worked right. We, declared the Ba'ath Party illegal. The Ba'ath Party they're the people that ran everything. So now nobody knows how to run anything.
Yeah.
They can't generate power.
What a lot of people, I guess, maybe if they haven't looked at a map, but, Iraq is centered around the Fertile Crescent, where civilization, started. So you have the Tigris and the Euphrates. I mean, everything is there in place that should have made it a perfect location for doing all that stuff. And I was always fascinated by how green Iraq, at least parts of it actually were. Yeah. You had this green, lush kind of, big lakes, lots of things growing, and not here, not like hardwood forests here. But it was still, there was a lot of things going on. And I was down in, Baghdad was, I'm trying to remember, anyways, south kind of central, and then to the west. That's where I was at. And so down there it's very green down there. But as soon as you leave the green, it's absolute desert.
Yeah. And it's moonscape.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, if I could ask, through your long career with the Army, did you see big changes from kind of the midpoint towards the end, or whereabouts did you see maybe some changes?
Yeah. Good question. So I went in 84. So Cold War was still going on. The unit I was in, the 82nd Airborne Division, had the capstone mission of that division. Even though most of the stuff that we were doing was down in Central and South America, that's where all the activity was. But our main mission was Europe. And this was when the Soviet horde was going to come through the Fulda Gap and, swamp Western Europe. So that was our big, that's what we trained for, was to go up against the Soviet Union. And for, part of all that, I was in that first part in the 82nd, I was a tow gunner. So, with all the armor that the Soviets had, that was, another big deal. The whole division was, the mission was to jump into Europe or airland into Europe, wherever you were going, and try to hold it for 72 to 96 hours until they could move other forces in there that were heavier, that could, that had armor, that had all the stuff to defeat these tanks. So we're going in with the 82nd is not a light division, but it's airborne. So there's no tanks other than little reconnaissance vehicles that the one armor unit had that aren't tanks. They're aluminum, 50 cal rounds go right through them. So that was the big mission, so that all the while I was in the 82nd, that was the focus. Cold War was on. There was, what I saw was a definite change when you got into the early to mid 90s, when I was going through the qualification course for Special Forces. They were actually drawing down the Army at that point. One of the classes I was supposed to go into was canceled just because we went from 5 classes a year down to 4. They let a bunch of guys out that year early. Basically, if they had 15 years in, they were letting guys out. My wife was in. She was a Russian. She was an intel analyst but she had Russian as her language. The focus was off Russia. Everybody, Russia was, or the Soviet Union wasn't an enemy anymore. She was a Russian speaker. She ended up, they didn't care what, if she reenlisted or not. So we had a young daughter at the time. So she got out and went to Fort Bragg with me when I went to the Q course. They were letting people out. 18 Deltas. So the Special Forces medics were critically under strength, and they were letting them out too, because, the Cold War was over. So nothing was going to happen again until we ramped it all up over in the Balkans. But, because you got to keep something going, right? But yeah, so that, and then into, the 90s, we just did a lot of, basically we worked for, essentially you're working for the State Department. You're going out and keeping all these ties with other militaries. You're training them, but at the same time, you're getting training out of it because you're becoming familiar with how they do things. And then a lot of that, into Thailand and Korea were the two big partners over in that part of the world. And then 9/11 kicked off, and the focus changed to, it was all the war on terror, and it stayed that way until I got out. So I went through probably 3 different phases in the military where, what the focus was. So yeah, it did change a lot.
Did you ever end up in Kosovo?
No, I was trying to get on one of those trips with 10th group. They were sending guys over, and we were right on Fort Carson with 10th group, and they needed people, but a lot of times they just deployed with short teams that didn't have all the people on it. I was trying to get on one of those, but it ends up being a funding thing between how do you move money from one component to the other. There were ways to do it, but that didn't really get really well ironed out until after 9/11. After 9/11, we were able to deploy with, everybody needed help.
Yeah.
So you could go pretty much anywhere and they would figure out the funding for it.
Yeah. I know I was on orders to go to Kosovo when 9/11 happened. And,
yep.
Now you talk about Kosovo and people are like, oh yeah, that was a thing, kind of.
Yeah. Most of the time people don't even remember
Right.
it. I mean, it's like it didn't happen.
Yep.
But it was, that was, while it was going on, that was a big deal. I went through the Q course with a guy that was Croatian, and as soon as he's a native speaker. As soon as we finished the Q course, he disappeared. He was gone for like 2 years, just doing, and he wasn't over there with 10th group. 10th group had people over there, but these were not regular deployments. Once the regular deployments started for that, he came home because they didn't want him in there anymore. But yeah, he was native speaker. He didn't have to go to language school with the rest of us.
Yeah. Did
So
you ever have to jump in anywhere?
Not for not under combat.
Okay, just for fun.
Type conditions. We were trying to get one in Iraq to one of the targets we were going to try to execute, and the command shot it down. Just mostly, I think, because they didn't want some of the guys in the company getting a combat jump out of it, and other guys wouldn't.
Right.
I think that was their biggest problem with it.
Bob,
the team that I replaced, they did the I think the only Halo jump in Iraq.
Okay.
In that one. Well, there was other people jumped in free fall, but they did it as an ODA.
Can you explain what a Halo jump is?
Oh, sorry. No, another acronym. Right? So Halo is high altitude, low opening, but it's actually so it falls under military free fall. So most of the jumping that people do it's a static line jump, so it's fairly low altitude. Probably the highest you jump from is about 1,500 feet, and then I've jumped as low as about 400. And that was not probably intentional. It was just it was really windy. We jumped into Turkey, and ended up 2 of the Turks that were on the jump with us got killed just because the winds were so high. We jumped in very high winds. The commanding general of the division jumped in with us, and he ended up being medevac with a head injury, medically retired from the Army for it. Generally though, the limit, the lower limit, I guess, is 500 feet that you're supposed to jump from, all the way up to about 1,500. You can go higher than that, but then it's harder to determine where you're going to land because the parachutes are not steerable.
Right.
They are steerable, but you can't really get anywhere with them.
Right.
They're good for turning, and that's about it. And then so high altitude, low opening, or you can also do a standoff or a high altitude, high opening jump where you jump out and then deploy your chute right away. That's good for like getting across borders or something. So the plane can stay on one side, you jump out and you fly the parachute across into another area. because you can go, depending on, you get the winds right and everything, you can go 20 miles cross country with those.
Yeah, I worked at airborne school, the
Yep.
Troop Medical Clinic for airborne school. So
Oh,
got to see a lot of interesting injuries, I guess, at
yeah.
you know.
Yep.
So
I was going to ask with like landing, you're coming in at a pretty good speed on that too, right? Like, is there a lot of injuries that take place to the knees and ankles and?
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a lot of like wear and tear. So I never broke anything. I never really sprained anything on a jump, but I, tore up just joints being worn out. I did get a really bad head injury on one jump. Actually 2 jumps. My first jump was a head injury, and then probably about my, I don't know, somewhere in the 30s, I had another one where I leapfrogged with these parachutes. If one parachute is above another one, there's no air up above this other parachute. So they call it leapfrogging. So I went past him into the ground. So I was probably about 120 feet when he went under me, and I went right into the ground.
no time to react when there's.
No, the parachute probably started to open up a little bit at the end again, but it kind of collapses it. And then, so I came to, and I couldn't see out of my right eye. So a pretty decent concussion out of it. And, so yeah, another one. So the first jump I did in jump school, I didn't really, everything looked so strange from up in the air. You're coming down, and all of a sudden I realized that there was Jeep tracks, and then you finally got a scale of what, how close I was, and I hit the ground, hit my head. I don't remember the second or third jump. So we did 3 jumps that day. I only remember the first one.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it does beat you up, but static line is actually fairly safe compared to like military free fall. You get a softer landing if you land correctly, but there's a lot more potential for running into somebody in the air, somebody opening up underneath you. You fly through them. So that happens with, it's not a real regular thing, but it does happen. And it's not, I'm never really surprised when I hear another free fall accident that resulted in a fatality, because it's probably one a year.
Yeah,
at least, and there's not that many people that do it.
We had because at Fort Benning, there's a Ranger battalion at Fort Benning, and
so you had the RRD there.
Yeah, Ranger Rendezvous one year happened during a thunderstorm, and I just happened to be working at the ER that day, and we took in a significant amount of Rangers that had been struck by lightning on the way down.
Yeah.
You can't cancel Ranger Rendezvous, not even for a.
No, they're not going to do that.
They jumped anyways, so.
Yeah.
I suspect some of them never jumped again after that, but some of the injuries were pretty bad. But so I guess I wanted to, because you're part of the Libertarian Party, and so are we, obviously, because we're doing the podcast. And but so what was your transition like? How did you get here to this? Thinking a little differently, especially considering your background.
Yeah. So I would say that I probably grew up thinking that way. So grew up in the 70s. If you read back through 70s and the early 80s, you think about some of the stuff that was going on, some of the movements that were happening. So you had, I remember, not that I wanted to join them or anything, but Posse Comitatus was a big deal. So if you ever heard of Gordon Call out in North Dakota, and that happened when I was in high school. But I really identified, they're tax protesters. They just kind of took that extra step. But you go back into that whole thing. Because I've remembered as a kid, kind of being sympathetic towards that side of it. And then as I got older, actually, the whole militia thing back in the early 90s, that's when I was going through the Q course. There was an underground newspaper that was going through special forces. The chain of command was trying to find these people and punish them. But there was a lot of very, not so much, I mean, because it's the Army, so it's not anti-government, but it was anti, the intrusions into your liberty.
Right.
And this was actually happening there was people that were very supportive of that in the military also. And there has been probably all along. Now there's, big witch hunts to try to find them. Back then it was the only ones I knew about were within special forces, but that has always been there. I've always been very sympathetic towards, anybody that's freedom minded, doesn't want to be, ruled over by the government. I mean, hell, so special forces, the motto is de oppresso libere, to liberate the oppressed. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing. And then we go in and do sometimes the opposite. But no, I've probably been that way most of my life. I didn't really consider myself a Republican. I always voted Republican because that seemed like, they were the good guys. And then the more time you spend around it, probably 2012. So I had retired in 2010, 2012, was big presidential election. So we went to our caucus, precinct caucus meeting. We went to the county one and then watched while the kind of the old guard Republicans squashed the whole Ron Paul thing.
Yeah.
And were actually, excluded. There was a whole bunch of people that were going to be delegates. They wanted to be delegates for Ron Paul. That's why they were there. They were all excited about it. And then watch the old Republicans, that I've been here since, we fought FDR, damn it, that kind of thing. And, they were not going to have anything to do with Ron Paul or anything like that. And then, so I really started to get turned off by what the party actually was. If you watched them nationally, there's no way you couldn't be turned off by them, but you kind of think that, well, maybe it's different locally. And the more I got involved in local politics, the more you realize that there's really no difference. The party bosses run the party. You're not welcome. Your ideas are not welcome. You're just going to, endorse the candidates that they support, and that's all it's going to be.
Right.
So finally, last spring, we had run a candidate against kind of the darling of the Republican Party, and so he didn't get endorsed through the regular process. So he went and took it to a primary. Didn't get it either, just kind of was close, but wasn't there. But anyway, after the Senate district convention that I was at, I was a delegate. I voted, for our guy. He didn't get it. So at that point, I think it was that was on a Saturday. I think on Monday, I went and sent in my stuff to the Libertarian Party. I had enough. And so I've kind of been a lifelong libertarian, I would say, but I finally joined the party last year just because of just finally being completely fed up with what the Republicans were doing and how, they say one thing, but yet really they're just the other half.
Right.
And, they each take turns being the bad guy, and they're really, I think both parties, their job is to control their people and get them to vote the right way. And this, and you could see it last year in Minnesota, if you watched what was going on between the Republicans and the Democrats and the leadership, and you'd always see the leadership together in huddles of both parties, and then they would figure out what they were going to pass. Right. So the whole thing is broken. So I finally just came here instead.
So there's two things that I wanted to touch on, and I wanted to make sure we talk about both of them, but I had only planned on one because I wanted to talk to you about what happened in Otter Tail County. You got wrapped up in that, but before, because you mentioned something, and not a lot of people, this isn't the Gordon Call situation is not a situation very many people are aware of.
Nope.
And honestly, the only reason that I know about it is because one of the guys that went to prison over that situation, as it turns out, is one of my customers, farmer's market.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So small world. And I didn't know that. I mean, I've known him for years. I didn't know that about him until I ran for school board last year. And so then he realized, like, oh, so we started talking politics and that kind of stuff. And he let me know his history and that kind of thing. I'm not going to say his name on here because he is still not the kind of guy that, he spent 5 years in prison because of it. So he's not willing to throw himself out there anymore. But how much information or what do you know about the story? Because there's, like I said, it's not something that a lot of people know about.
No, in fact, most people don't. And it happened. I mean, nobody around here remembers it either.
Right.
It only happened over in, I can't remember what the name of the town was anymore, over in North Dakota, but it was a big deal when it happened because that was national news, was happening out in Podunk, North Dakota. And it was a really big deal. It was a big influence to me. I mean, if you look at what has happened since, that was probably one of the first big incidences of that sort of thing happening. Randy Weaver was later, Waco was later, but you got a lot of the same players involved in it, and the MO is the same. They're trying to crush. A lot of people get away with not paying taxes, and they don't really care. I mean, they care if they catch you, they happen to catch you. But what Gordon Call was doing was trying to recruit people to his cause. So he was proselytizing, basically, the posse comitatus thing, the not paying taxes, and that can't stand. So they targeted him, specifically for that. And so there ended up, without getting into the whole thing, and there's a lot of speculation about, what the reasons were and everything else. There's a couple of books out on it. So whenever there was something that came out on it, even I think the last one, it was probably in the 90s or in the 2000s. There was a book came out written by actually two of the deputies or police officers that were along on that. But so I always tried to read everything I could on it. But yeah, he ended up, they tried to arrest him, serve a warrant on him, federal warrant on him. And they were ready for him, and they started shooting. So there was a big shootout, a couple of guys killed. And then Gordon Call and his son, and probably there was other people also, but they disappeared. So nobody really knew where they were. And then later on, I can't remember the exact timeline of how long this was, but I remember then when they were surrounded in a farmhouse down in Arkansas, I think it was. And basically, it was like, you knew that he wasn't going to survive this thing because their goal was to kill him.
Yeah.
And they killed him, and they burned the house down. And a lot of things that you start to see later on. There was, I can't even remember when I think what was it? I can't remember what city that was either, where the FBI started a fire and burned a whole apartment building down. That happened when I was in high school too. So, you're already starting to see these patterns emerge, and Gordon Call was the one that I really remember, as just because it was close by.
Yeah. You should sometime when you're up in Bemidji, maybe I'll introduce you to my friend, because I've heard the whole story from his perspective, right? And so
Yep, I've heard it both ways. One of the marshals that was on it, the guy that lived, the marshal, later on worked in the courthouse in Fargo. And when I was doing work study, when I was in college after being in the 82nd, the VA the regional office was in the federal building downtown. So I was able to talk to him several times too. And he wouldn't really say much about that. But every once in a while, just knowing that was the guy that was in the shootout. So you kind of get and then knowing a lot of law enforcement people are on the air, trying to get one impression. But a couple of the guys that were involved in it, were really kind of sympathetic towards Gordon Call also, just because of the way that whole thing was handled. They didn't feel it was handled correctly.
Yeah, well, I mean, he didn't live through it, so.
Right. Yeah, and the thing was, you knew that, I mean, that was the attitude, or that's what everybody really thought, was that, okay, once they catch him, they're going to kill him because of what he did. So you get, some people are allowed to do extrajudicial killings and some are not. So.
Right. So what happened in Otter Tail County?
So we had, so it's a lot of influence coming from the federal level. So you got Michelle Fischbach is the representative for CD7. And what has happened is that you've got her staffers. So one of her staffers is the chair of the Otter Tail County BPOU. And they're in other counties also. So you can see the fingers, getting out into these local races. There was a representative. So it's Jordan Rasmussen was a representative. He had replaced Bud Nornis. Bud Nornis had been there forever, wouldn't go away, finally retired. Jordan ran pretty much, I mean, he was unopposed. It was kind of like the position was willed to him by Bud Nornis. So he became a representative, and that was only 2 years before. Now he was running for state senate because with redistricting, Bill Ingebrigtsen was going to retire. He was the senator for the way the Senate district was made up at that time. And then we had a little conflict too with Tori Westrom. So Tori was, with redistricting, they both ended up in the same district. So there was a little drama there also. Finally, Tori's going to run down in his district, or going to move into his district that most of his former district had been in. Never actually lived in the house, but that was another whole thing that went on in that one. So Jordan's running in Senate District 9, and there was a lot of people that didn't feel that he was conservative enough, and so they found another candidate to run against him. That was Nathan Miller. So Nathan ran against him through the process, from the county convention to the Senate District 9 convention. Lost, but not by a lot. So he decided, since it was close, he would take it to a primary. So he went to the primary and lost, not by a lot. But that had already kind of upset the old guard Republicans, because their candidate that they were supporting, was having to now spend extra money. The Republican Party dumped a bunch of extra money into the district just because. And Nathan Miller's running as a Republican. He's a conservative. So who cares really who gets in there? You've got a Republican, right? But yet they didn't want to have, I mean, it's almost like they want to be able to control their people, whereas Nathan Miller would not be somebody that they could control. So, and that upset the BPOU to no end. Plus there was, so during the race, I was actually helping with a sheriff's candidate. So I didn't really, especially after the Senate or after the primary, I wasn't campaigning with Nathan anymore, or helping him on his campaign. I was helping this candidate that we had for sheriff. But they still lumped me in with the 33 that they didn't let us. I was already out of the Republican Party anyway, so it didn't matter. But I would not have been allowed to attend the convention this spring.
Simply because you just supported the wrong candidate.
Yeah. Well, probably my big sin was that I had been out collecting signatures for Bull Johnson and for Jake. And even that, so you'd think, right, this is the Republican Party, you should support as much democracy, or as much, giving the people their choice. And that was my great transgression, was helping them try to get on the ballot to run against a Republican candidate. my wife helped with the Nathan Miller campaign all the way to the end. So that's where she was out. And there's 33 people that were not allowed against their constitution, against all the bylaws. You can't, I'm elected by my township to represent them to this convention. It's not the other way around, that the BPOU gets to pick who they're going to have in these conventions. We're representatives of the precinct that we're from, and they've completely turned it around. So they're able to turn off representation for whoever they want to. And that was the big thing. That was the big, dust up last year. And then going into this spring, that's where part of that bill, I think, with bumping up to 10% also. So the Republicans they like to not have their names on anything, but that their fingers are in it, that they're also pushing these things. And it's just, that's the MO for them. It's, the things that they want to get passed that isn't going to be popular with the people that vote for them. Otter County is 70 to 75% votes Republican. And it doesn't even matter who it is. They just vote for the R. So, anything, all of this is a threat to them, but they can't put their name on it, that they're trying to exclude other people, but they're in it. And the Nathan Miller, Jordan Rasmussen race is one of the big ones, because that went out to the very end. And I think that's where some of this stuff, they're colluding with the DFL to try to restrict that access to, candidates that didn't make it through the endorsing process from the BPOU, any of this stuff. Basically what we saw in Otter County, they're trying to exclude that.
Yeah, well, the chair of the Republican Party wrote a letter in support of increasing the major party status from 5% to 10%.
Yep.
And I went to the House of Representatives, their committee hearing, and it was really nice. You can tell that there is a split in the Republican Party in Minnesota, because the Republicans that were sitting on the committee, and one of them is my Matt Bliss. He is the representative for Bemidji. They took the letter from the Republican chair and crumpled it up and threw it into the center of the floor. I was like, oh, that was amazing. Thanks, guys. But so you can tell that there's a lot of conflict in the Republican Party in Minnesota.
Yeah. We've got some of the other county BPOUs in Senate District 9 now have formally condemned the Otter County BPOU for their actions last year and this spring. So they've actually gotten letters from those BPOUs within the Senate district that are, a lot of them were Miller supporters, and so they don't like what's going on either. So there is a split. You got kind of the old guard type Republicans that just want things to be the way they want it. And then you've got, they're really good people, they're conservative. They are actually pro small government. It's just that the Republican Party isn't pro small government.
Right. I know. And up here in Beltrami County, the GOP is, they wonder why they're losing races. Yeah. Unless you're in a heavily, unless you're in an area that's just entrenched red, you're going to be fine. Yeah. But, the moment that they have an opportunity, and that was my experience, the moment they have an opportunity, they're just going to bend on their principles and just act completely like the Democrats, or, they act the same.
Yeah. My representative, so I can't even remember what bill it was now. There's so many of them that people have flip-flopped on, but, very secure district. He's going to get reelected as long as he wants to run, because, I think at this point it's going to be really hard to run somebody against them and make it through the process that the BPOU has set up. But he voted, and this is a spending bill. It was almost $2 billion, whatever that one was earlier this spring. He voted for it. No, I don't, sorry about that. I don't think he wanted to. I don't think that's in his nature to want to vote for those, but Mary Franson, next, couple districts away, voted for it also. Both, I think, probably fairly conservative. Mary Franson did a lot of good work during COVID. Some stuff that wasn't so good either, but both of them voted for it. And I think that was just some arm twisting by the state party that, we have to have so much support for this so that it passes, because the DFL probably couldn't pass it on their own. And so they had a couple of the Republicans, and they're both in very secure districts. They're not going to lose. And that might, it might even be like, the mob does, where they got to dirty somebody up so that they own them after that.
Right.
And so they did. I mean, they voted for it. They spent almost $2 billion in that bill of the surplus. So, they're just as bad as anybody else as far as the overall state party goes.
Yeah.
I think you have some good people in the Republican Party, but it's.
Yeah. I mean, and we just have to convince them that we're a viable option.
Right. And that's the really hard thing. I'm probably not the greatest orator when I go to talk to them either, but a lot of them they've been Republicans for so long that they can't get it through their mind that they might not be a Republican for the rest of their life,
Right.
And they like the platform. They like the idea that the Republican Party has, but the Republican Party never seems to really follow their platform. They have a platform out there that works nice for advertising, and then they do whatever they're going to do.
Yeah. Well, we only have a few more minutes left. I was told I have to keep this under an hour because YouTube is funny.
Yeah,
and so is there anything else that you would, maybe if we didn't cover, or anything else talk about?
No, not that I can think of. I guess you pull my string and start talking, and I just probably want me to shut up sometimes.
And we covered a lot. So, there's only so much time, but
yeah, no,
I really appreciate talking to you, because as an Army medic, we always looked up to the 18 Deltas. You guys were like the standard of, what it meant to be high speed. Thank
you. I loved doing that job when I was doing it. I mean, and the training we got was, you couldn't ask for better training. It's the best medical training that you can get outside of being a doctor, I think. And
Right.
We learned a lot of stuff that was, normally only a doctor would be doing, and we were able to do it. We were trained to do it. And that was a fun thing about going on those J sets in the 90s, was that a lot of times you got to do it because, we might be doing, a mission out someplace and one of the docs wouldn't make it, and you'd go in and be the doc,
Right.
And it was fun. It was challenging. It was a lot of responsibility, but it was really good training.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for being on here this evening.
No, you're welcome.
Appreciate your time. And I just wanted to, I was told I need to announce events coming up. So there is an event on May 18th. It's the Women's Health and Data Privacy featuring Twyla Brace. It's it's our women's affiliate. I can't remember which counties it is. Sorry, but it's on lpmn.org. So if you want to go find out more information, you can go onto the website and get the link. If you would like to join the Libertarian Party of Minnesota, it's lpmn.org, and then just, find the links from there. So again, thank you for your time. And we are right at 59 minutes.
There we go.
Perfect.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yep. You're welcome. Thank you.